I had been planning a solo camping trip for a while. Work had been exhausting. My head was full of noise, and I needed to clear it. I wanted to be away from everything. The endless messages, the crowded streets, the constant pull of emails and calls. I wanted quiet, real quiet. I chose a place deep in the woods, a national forest I had been to before but never fully explored. It was early autumn, a time when the crowds thinned out and the air was cool but not freezing. The trees were turning gold and orange, the days were shorter, and the nights were cold. I packed light, my tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small camp stove, and some warm clothes. I also carried a small hatchet and a long knife, not because I expected trouble, but because it was always good to have tools. I hiked in early in the day, following a narrow trail that wound its way deep into the woods. I wanted to be far away from the usual campgrounds, so I went off the main trail after an hour and followed a smaller side path. The forest was thick, with tall trees overhead and dry leaves underfoot. I walked until I felt sure I was alone. No sounds of people, no trash or cigarette butts on the ground, no old fire pits. I set up my tent in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The ground was soft but dry, and I picked a spot slightly raised so it wouldn't get wet if it rained. I gathered some fallen wood for a small fire, cooked a simple dinner, and sat by the fire as the light faded. The forest grew dark quickly, and soon the only light was from the small fire in front of me. I sat wrapped in my jacket, staring at the flames, listening to the crackle of burning wood and the occasional snap of a branch somewhere out in the dark. The air smelled of smoke and damp leaves. After a while, I crawled into my tent and zipped it up, pulling my sleeping bag tight around me. The cold crept in, and I could hear the wind moving through the trees outside. I lay still, breathing slowly, letting myself sink into the quiet. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was sudden, a jolt that shot me awake, though I wasn't sure why at first. I lay there, holding my breath, heart pounding, listening hard. There was a sound, a faint crunching, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I froze, ears straining. Maybe it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon. The forest was full of animals, and they moved around at night. I told myself that, but the sound continued, slow, careful steps moving closer. I felt the cold sweat break out on my back. I lay still, trying to calm my breathing, every muscle tight. The steps moved around the clearing. Who the hell would be out here? I hadn't seen a single person all day. I was miles off the main trail. There was no reason for anyone to be this deep in the woods at this hour, unless they were here for me. The thought hit hard, sending a surge of fear through me. I reached slowly for my knife, careful not to make any noise, fingers closing around the handle. The steps circled, not rushing, not stumbling, slow, steady. Then they stopped. I lay there in the dark, heart hammering, listening, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe more. I couldn't tell how long. Finally, I dared to lift the edge of the sleeping bag and shift forward, pressing my eye to the tent fabric, trying to see out through the small mesh window. The night was black. I couldn't see anything. My mouth was dry, and my hand shook slightly on the knife. I thought about making a run for it, but the forest was thick, the ground uneven, and I had no idea where the person, if it was a person, was. Running blind through the woods could end badly. So I stayed. I stayed still, breathing slow and shallow, knife in hand, waiting. At some point, I must have drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, because I woke again when the first faint light touched the sky. I unzipped the tent carefully, looking out. The clearing was empty. No sign of anyone. No footprints in the dirt, though the ground was hard and covered in dry leaves. I got up slowly, body stiff and cold, and walked the edge of the clearing. I didn't see anything. No gear, no campfire, no sign that anyone had been there. Maybe it had been an animal after all. Maybe I had imagined the careful steps, the slow circling. Maybe, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I packed up quickly, shoving everything into my pack, taking only a few bites of food before heading back. I didn't want to be there anymore. The woods, which had felt peaceful the day before, now felt watchful, heavy, full of shadows. I hiked fast, checking over my shoulder more than once, jumping at small sounds. A bird taking off, a branch cracking underfoot, the wind pushing through the trees. It took me a couple of hours to get back to the main trail, and when I finally reached the place where I had parked, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I loaded up my gear and got into the car, locking the doors right away. I sat there for a few minutes, hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel, looking out at the edge of the trees. There was no one there, but as I drove away, I kept thinking about how far I had been from the trail, how deep into the woods I had gone, how careful the steps had sounded. The scariest thing you can find in the woods isn't a bear, or a wolf, or some imagined monster. It's another person, someone who doesn't want to be seen, someone who follows you, watches you, moves just out of sight. I didn't go back to that spot again. And even now, when I think about camping alone, I remember that night. The slow steps outside the tent, the circling figure I never saw, the cold feeling that stayed with me all the way home. And I wonder how close they really got. There's a strange weight that settles on you after something like that happens. Something you can't just shake off or forget. It lingers, presses in on your chest every time you try to breathe normally. Every time you close your eyes and remember the quiet that wasn't really quiet. The stillness that wasn't really still. I've told this story once or twice since, always leaving out the parts that don't quite make sense, the things I don't have answers for. But the truth is, that night in the woods changed how I see everything. The way I think about safety, about nature, about people and what they're capable of. We had been camping just like we'd done so many times before. Just me, my family, and the forest. It was late September, the kind of fall where the air smells crisp and clean, but winter is only a few weeks away. The trees around us were heavy with leaves, some already brown and curled at the edges, ready to fall at any moment. We chose a spot deep in the national forest, a place marked on the map as a no-hunting area. The reason was simple: we wanted peace. We wanted quiet. We wanted to be surrounded by nothing but the sounds of nature. The first day was exactly what we expected. The sun shone warm and bright as we pitched the tent near a slow creek that wound through the trees like a silver snake. The ground was soft with moss and fallen leaves. We unpacked the car, carried the cooler, sleeping bags and lanterns, and set everything up carefully. Our tent was a simple dome, big enough for the four of us, and we made sure it was staked down tight against the wind and any surprise rain. There were birds singing, the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush, and the steady sound of the creek flowing nearby. We built a small fire in a metal ring, gathered wood from the forest floor, and cooked dinner over the flames. It smelled like smoke and pine, mixed with the earthy scent of damp leaves. As night fell, the sky turned dark, dusted with stars, and the forest settled into a calm quiet. But that calm quiet was just a mask. Later that night, when we were all inside the tent, trying to fall asleep to the sound of crickets and owls, the silence was broken by a sudden, terrifying noise. Gunshots. Sharp, loud, and close. The first one made me jump out of my sleeping bag, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. More shots followed, rapid and echoing off the trees like thunder. There was no warning, no chance to prepare. We scrambled out of the tent, the cold night air hitting our faces. My parents grabbed the kids, pulling us back toward the safety of the car. But when we looked back at the tent, my stomach dropped. The canvas walls were shredded, ripped apart by bullets. It looked like someone had used it for target practice, the fabric torn and pierced with dozens of holes. The ground around the tent was littered with spent shell casings, gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The trees close by had jagged scars where bullets had chipped away bark and wood. Whoever had fired those shots had been close, deliberate, and no one else was around, just the forest and us. It was a no-hunting area, a place where guns were not allowed to be fired, especially not in the middle of the night. The thought that someone had ignored those rules, that they had been out there with a rifle, aiming at a family's tent, sent a chill deeper than the cold night air. We packed up as quickly and quietly as we could, leaving the ruined tent behind. There was no time to be scared or angry. Survival came first. The car felt small and fragile as we drove away, the radio silent, the night pressing in from all sides. My parents kept their eyes on the road, trying to find a route out of the forest. My little brother and sister were quiet, clinging to blankets and to each other, wide-eyed and scared. The next morning, once we were safely out of the forest and back where there was signal, my parents called the police. We told them everything: the shooting, the destroyed tent, the no hunting signs. They took notes, promised an officer would come to the site as soon as possible. But from that day forward, the investigation seemed to stall. Weeks passed. No arrests, no explanations. The rangers said it wasn't the first time illegal hunting or shooting had happened in the area, but nothing on this scale. Nothing so close to where families camped. We tried to understand what had happened, who would do something like that, and why. Sometimes I'd think about it late at night, the shots ringing out, the tent tearing apart, the way the forest had gone silent afterward. I wondered if whoever fired those bullets had been hunting illegally or if they had been trying to send a message. Maybe they didn't even know anyone was inside the tent. Maybe it was careless or worse. But no matter how much I tried to make sense of it, the questions piled up, unanswered. The police never found the shooter. No one else reported hearing gunfire that night. The no hunting signs remained, quiet and unchanging. But the forest wasn't quiet for us anymore. We never went back there. We never camped in that part of the woods again. It wasn't just the risk of another shooting. It was the knowledge that sometimes people act without warning or reason, and the world doesn't always protect you. That the rules written on signs and maps don't always matter. That safety can be broken with a single bullet, and then nothing is the same again. For months after, I would replay the sounds in my head: the crack of gunfire, the tearing fabric, the silence that followed. It felt unreal, like a bad dream that I couldn't wake up from. I thought about the bullet holes, the casings scattered like shiny little reminders of what could have happened. We replaced the tent, but it was never the same. The woods around us seemed larger, darker, less friendly. My family talked about moving away from camping, or maybe finding a different hobby, something safer, something less likely to turn deadly in the blink of an eye. I learned that sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with monsters or ghosts. They're the ones where the danger is human, where the rules are broken, and no one is there to stop it. The woods are quiet again now, or at least they seem to be. But the memory of that night stays with me, a shadow I can't shake. It's a reminder that no matter how peaceful a place looks, and no matter what signs say, danger can still be close by, waiting, silent until it strikes. And that's why I always report what I see now, no matter how strange or small it seems. Because sometimes the only way to stay safe is to make sure someone else knows, too. Even if the answers don't come right away, or maybe never come at all. That's the story. That's the quiet that followed. I had always been drawn to the idea of solitude in the wild. Something about being deep in the woods, far from roads and houses, surrounded by only trees and wind. It sounded peaceful, almost like stepping out of the noise of the world for a little while. I wasn't a total beginner when it came to camping. I had done short trips before, some hiking and camping alone, but this time I wanted to go deeper. I picked a stretch of forest about 4 hours from where I lived. Not a big national park, but a lesser-known state forest with miles of dense woods and not a lot of marked trails. I didn't want to camp near a road or a main trail. I wanted to be somewhere truly quiet, away from the kinds of campsites where people leave trash and make noise late into the night. So I went deep. I packed light but carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, food for 2 nights, plenty of water, a small camp stove, flashlight, extra batteries, map, compass, knife, and a small hatchet. I also had a waterproof coat, extra socks, and gloves. It was early fall and the nights were already getting cold. I drove to the edge of the forest, parked at a small lot that was mostly empty, and hiked in on a marked trail for the first hour. Then I turned off onto a smaller, unmarked path. I followed that for another couple of hours, making sure to pay attention to landmarks and checking my compass every so often. I wanted to be able to get back easily, even if my phone battery died. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. I heard birds now and then, the wind in the trees, the dry crunch of leaves under my boots. I didn't see another person all afternoon. By the time I found a small clearing, the sun was starting to drop. I set up my tent, gathered some wood for a small fire, and made dinner on the camp stove. I ate slowly, feeling the peace of the place settle in. The woods stretched out in every direction, the trees tall and dark, the sky slowly going purple and blue above me. When the fire burned low, I sat quietly, just listening. It was a kind of stillness you don't get near cities or even small towns. No hum of distant cars, no far-off voices, no lights, just the dark, the cold, and the soft sounds of the forest. Leaves brushing together, a night bird calling somewhere, maybe the faint rustle of some small animal moving through the undergrowth. I crawled into my tent, zipped up the door, and slipped into my sleeping bag. The ground was cold under me, even with the sleeping pad, and I could feel the chill settling into the air. I turned off my flashlight, letting the darkness fill the space, and lay there listening to the wind. It was the middle of the night when I woke up. First, I didn't know why. I lay there, heart beating a little fast, ears straining. Then I heard it, a soft crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. I froze, breathing shallow, every part of me suddenly tense. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe a fox. Animals move through the woods at night. I had known that when I came out here, but then I heard it again, and it was closer. Slow, careful, one step at a time. Not the quick, darting movement of an animal. I lay still, eyes wide in the dark, fingers gripping the knife I kept by my side. The steps circled the clearing, slow and steady. I imagined someone moving just outside, walking carefully around the tent, not speaking, not making any noise beyond those soft crunching footsteps. I could hear my own heartbeat loud in my ears. The steps paused. I strained to hear. Nothing. Then, a faint scrape, like something dragging over bark or rough fabric. I wanted to sit up, to unzip the tent and look out, but I was frozen. Every instinct told me to stay still, to listen, to wait. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. I lay there, every muscle tight, breathing as quietly as I could. Finally, the steps moved again, slowly, fading away, until I couldn't hear them anymore. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the roof of the tent, clutching the knife, listening hard for any sound. But nothing came back. When the first pale light of morning crept through the tent, I slowly sat up, heart still pounding. I unzipped the door carefully and looked out. The clearing was empty. I stepped outside, shivering in the cold morning air, and walked the edge of the camp. The ground was covered in dry leaves, making it hard to see clear footprints. But here and there I noticed spots where the leaves had been disturbed, pressed down in a way that didn't look like an animal. I packed up quickly, stuffing everything into my bag with shaking hands. I didn't make breakfast, didn't even bother with coffee. I just wanted to get out of there. As I hiked back, I kept looking over my shoulder, every small sound making me jump. The woods felt different now, less peaceful, more watchful. When I reached the main trail, I let out a long breath. It was still early, the light fresh and clean, and I started to feel a little calmer. I told myself maybe it had been nothing. Maybe I had imagined it, half awake, nerves playing tricks on me. But when I got back to the car, I noticed something that stopped me cold. On the driver's side door, just below the window, was a faint smear, like someone had run dirty fingers down the glass. I hadn't seen it when I left the day before. I stood there for a long minute, heart hammering again, staring at the smear. It wasn't big, just 4 streaks, like someone had lightly dragged their hand down the window. I unlocked the car, got in, and locked the doors right away. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The drive home was a blur. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me on the empty road. When I got home, I unpacked slowly, still shaken. I kept thinking about the night, the slow steps, the circling, the scrape, and then the smear on the car window. What did they want? I'll never know. Maybe it was just someone wandering the woods, though I can't imagine why, that deep, that late. Maybe they were curious, maybe they meant no harm. But maybe they were waiting to see if I would come out. Maybe they were looking for a moment when I let my guard down. I'll never know, but I haven't gone back to solo camping since. Because the scariest thing in the woods isn't the animals, or the dark, or even the cold. It's the people you never hear, never see. The ones who move just out of sight, watching, waiting, and leaving you wondering what they were really after. I had always loved camping alone. Some people didn't understand that. They told me it was dangerous, that it was boring, that it was lonely. But for me, it was peaceful. No one talking, no one asking for anything, no noise but the sound of the trees and the birds and the wind. When I went camping, I could think clearly. I didn't have to look at my phone, answer emails, or deal with anyone's problems. I could just be out there under the open sky with nothing but the quiet and the simple tasks of setting up camp, making a fire, cooking my food. I didn't usually go that deep into the woods. I liked going far enough that I didn't hear cars or see other people, but I also liked knowing that if I needed to, I could hike back out in an hour or two. But this time, I wanted to go further. I wanted to really get away, just for a weekend, just to clear my head. So, I picked a spot on the map that looked perfect. A large stretch of forest, crisscrossed with trails, but not many official campsites. I figured if I hiked in for a few hours, I could find a place all my own. I packed carefully: tent, sleeping bag, small stove, food, water, extra clothes, map, compass, knife, flashlight, extra batteries. I didn't tell many people where I was going, just a quick message to a friend saying I'd be out for the weekend and I'd check in when I got back. I drove out early on a Friday morning, parked at the trailhead, and set off into the woods. The air was cool, the sun just starting to rise, and I felt good. The trail was narrow and winding, but I liked that. It meant fewer people came out this way. I walked for hours, taking breaks now and then to drink water and check the map. I didn't see anyone else. By early afternoon, I found a small clearing off the trail. It was perfect, flat, dry, surrounded by tall trees. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked a simple meal on the stove. The woods around me were quiet, just the soft rustling of leaves, the occasional bird call. I felt relaxed, settled in, happy to be alone. As the sun set, the air grew colder. I sat by the small fire, eating and listening to the sounds of the forest. Eventually, the fire burned down, and I crawled into my tent, zipped up the flap, and slid into my sleeping bag. I fell asleep easily. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. I just lay there, heart beating a little fast, ears straining in the dark. Then I heard it, a faint sound like footsteps on dry leaves. I froze. It was probably an animal, I told myself. Maybe a deer, maybe a raccoon. But the steps were slow, careful, almost human. I held my breath, listening. The steps circled the clearing. I imagined someone moving just outside the tent, walking slowly, quietly, around and around. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't dare move. The steps stopped. I waited, every nerve on edge, hand gripping the knife I kept next to my sleeping bag. Then, after a long time, the steps moved away, slowly, fading into the distance. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just lay there, staring up at the dark roof of the tent, listening, waiting. But I didn't hear anything else. When morning finally came, I stepped out carefully, looking around. The clearing was empty. I saw no one, no trace of anyone. I told myself it had just been an animal, that I had imagined the slow, circling steps. Still, I packed up quickly. I didn't want to stay another night. As I hiked back, I kept looking over my shoulder. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves, made me jump. I felt watched, uneasy, though I saw no one. At one point, I stopped for water and looked down at the trail. That's when I noticed something. There were footprints. Not mine. I could see mine, sure, but these were different. Larger, heavier, and they followed the trail behind me. My heart pounded. I hadn't seen anyone out here. Not once. But someone had been walking behind me, maybe just out of sight. I kept walking, faster now, almost a jog. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I had gone deep into the woods, further than I normally would, and now I realized that I was completely alone, except I wasn't. Someone else was out here. I reached the main trail, then the lot where my car was parked. It was late afternoon by the time I got back, the sun starting to sink low. I glanced around the lot. Only a few cars remained, mine and maybe 2 others. I unlocked my car, tossed my pack in the back, and slid into the driver's seat. That's when I noticed it. On the rear window there was a smear, for long streaks like someone had dragged their fingers down the glass. I sat there, frozen, staring at the marks. My mouth went dry. I had locked the car when I left. I was sure of it. But that didn't stop someone from touching it, watching it, waiting. I turned the key, started the engine, and drove away fast, heart hammering in my chest. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking. How long had they been following me? Was it just that night, when I heard the steps circling the clearing? Or had they been there the whole time, from the moment I stepped off the main trail, watching me set up camp, waiting for me to fall asleep? I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe just a passing hiker, maybe some curious kid. But the truth was, I had gone so far off the main paths that it didn't make sense for anyone else to be there. And the footprints, the smear on the car, they told a different story. I didn't go back to the woods for a long time after that. Because here's the thing, you can prepare for animals. You can prepare for the weather, for getting lost, even for hurting yourself out there. But you can't prepare for people, the ones you don't see, the ones you don't hear, the ones who follow you just out of sight, waiting, watching. The scariest part isn't the night you hear the footsteps. The scariest part is knowing they might have been there the whole time. I had always wanted to try real cowboy camping. Not the sort of camping we do back home in England, where you pitch a tent on a muddy field and spend the whole time worrying about the rain. No, I wanted the real thing. Under the stars, no tent, no walls, just me and the sky. When I planned a trip to the US, I decided Lake Tahoe would be the perfect place to do it. I'd read about it, seen the pictures, and it looked breathtaking. Huge forests, deep blue water, snow-capped peaks in the distance. I didn't know a lot about the wildlife, I'll admit that. I knew there were bears in the area, but I wasn't too worried. In England, we don't have anything like that. The worst you might get is a fox nosing through your rubbish. So when I packed up my gear, I didn't overthink it. I had my sleeping bag, a ground pad, a small stove, food, water, flashlight, knife, a thin emergency blanket, and a bear canister I rented because someone at the gear shop said it was required. The first day of hiking was everything I'd hoped for. The trail wound up through the pines, the lake gleaming in the distance, and the air was so clean it almost made my lungs ache. I stopped often to take pictures, drink water, and just soak it all in. It was peaceful, and even though I passed a few other hikers, I mostly felt like I had the trail to myself. By late afternoon, I found a flat, open spot near the shore of the lake. It was perfect. The sun was still up, but the shadows were getting longer, and the light on the water was golden. I set down my pack, stretched out my arms, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what I wanted. I set up a little cooking spot, just a small stove to boil water for a freeze-dried meal, and then stashed my food and scented items in the bear canister, placing it a good distance from where I planned to sleep. I'd read that you should never keep food near your sleeping spot, so I was careful about that. After eating, I laid out my sleeping bag right under the open sky. The stars were already starting to come out, and the air had that cool, fresh smell of pine and water. I lay there for a long time just staring up, feeling small and calm and lucky. Eventually, I drifted off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. Maybe around 2 or 3 a.m. I woke because something was wrong. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in the air. Presence. I opened my eyes, slowly, carefully, and saw it. A bear. It was standing right over me. I'm English. I had never seen a bear before. Not in real life, not in the wild, not 5 feet away. My brain almost couldn't process it at first. I stared up at this massive shape, the huge dark head, the powerful shoulders, the glint of its nose catching the faint moonlight. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I knew, somehow instinctively, that running would be the worst thing I could do. I couldn't fight it, I couldn't shout it away. I had nothing between me and it but a thin layer of nylon and down. I closed my eyes. I didn't know what else to do. I just lay there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, forcing myself to stay still, forcing myself to breathe slowly, shallowly. The bear shifted. I could feel its weight in the ground, hear the soft scuff of its paws. It leaned closer. I could smell it. A heavy, musky, earthy smell, mixed with the faint scent of pine needles and damp fur. Time stretched out. I don't know how long it stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 5, maybe longer. Then, just as quietly, it moved away. I kept my eyes closed, counting slowly in my head. I told myself I wouldn't move until I was sure it was gone. 50 counts, 100, 200. When I finally opened my eyes again, the bear was gone. The stars were still out. The lake was still, dark, silent. The world hadn't changed, but I had. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat up slowly, carefully, heart still racing, looking around the clearing. I didn't see anything, but I kept hearing sounds, small noises in the brush, a crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Every sound made my skin crawl. Eventually, when the first light of dawn touched the trees, I got up, rolled up my sleeping bag with shaking hands, and packed my gear. I didn't eat. I didn't make coffee. I just wanted to get moving. I checked the bear canister. It was untouched. Whatever the bear had wanted, it hadn't been the food. Maybe it was just curious. Maybe I had camped in a spot it liked to pass through. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I hiked back out that morning, fast, not stopping to rest, not stopping to eat, just walking. Every time I heard a sound in the woods, I jumped. I kept imagining the bear behind me, following, watching, waiting. By the time I reached the trailhead and saw my rental car, I almost cried with relief. I threw my pack into the back seat, got in, and sat there for a long moment just breathing, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. That night, back in the hotel, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over. That moment when I opened my eyes and saw it standing over me. That massive shape, the silent presence. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been, how easily it could have ended badly. I hadn't been brave. I hadn't done anything smart. I had just been lucky. After that trip, I didn't do any more cowboy camping. I still camp, but now I always bring a tent, and I'm much more careful about where I sleep, how I store food, and what areas I camp in. I learned something important that night. Nature doesn't care if you're experienced or a beginner, if you're local or a visitor, if you're prepared or not. It's bigger than you, and it can take you by surprise at any moment. I was lucky. That's all it was. Pure luck. And when I remember that night, I still feel my heart race, still remember the smell, the sound, the weight of that moment. Lying perfectly still under the stars, pretending to sleep, knowing that one wrong move might have been my last. I was on a solo trip through the US, something I'd been planning for years. I'm English, born and raised, and I'd only done small hiking trips back home, the kind you take on familiar trails, with no dangerous wildlife beyond a grumpy badger or the occasional annoyed cow. But I wanted something more, something big. The wild places you see in films, the vast landscapes, the towering forests, the sense that you're completely alone. So I flew to the US, rented a car, and made my way up through Northern California, stopping at national parks, camping in official sites, doing everything properly. But as I got more confident, I started venturing further, away from the marked trails and the busy campgrounds. I wanted to feel what it was like to really be out there, to sleep under the stars, no tent, just me and the world. That's how I ended up in a national forest near the Oregon border. Deep in the trees, no marked campsite, no other people around. I had my sleeping bag, my backpack, my food stored carefully in a bear canister. I'd read all the safety guides. I thought I was prepared. The first night was peaceful. I laid out my ground sheet and sleeping bag, ate a simple meal, watched the stars come out. The quiet was like nothing I'd ever known. No traffic, no voices, no streetlights, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees, the occasional creak of a branch. I remember feeling proud, a little bit smug even. I was doing it, I was out here on my own handling it. The second night, things changed. I hiked further into the forest during the day, exploring a narrow trail that twisted down toward a creek. The trees were taller here, the undergrowth thicker, the light dim even at midday. I saw no one all day. When I reached a small clearing by the creek, I decided to make camp there. It was a beautiful spot, moss-covered rocks, the gentle sound of water, soft ground. I set up as usual, cooked dinner, cleaned up, packed away the food. As night fell, I lay back in my bag, staring up at the sliver of sky I could see through the trees. I remember thinking that this was exactly what I'd come for, this sense of peace and isolation. But sometime in the night, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The forest was dark, so dark I could barely see the shapes of the trees. The air was cold, damp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones even inside a sleeping bag. I listened carefully, heart starting to beat a little faster. There was a sound, not the wind, not the water. Something heavier, slower, a deliberate sound. Footsteps. I froze. I lay perfectly still, breathing shallowly, straining to hear. The steps were coming closer, moving through the trees on the far side of the clearing. This was the moment I realized that all my planning, all my reading, hadn't prepared me for the reality of another person showing up in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night. I had no tent, no walls, no lock, nothing but my thin sleeping bag and a knife tucked deep in my backpack. I closed my eyes. I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's what I did. It felt somehow like the safest thing. If I didn't move, if I didn't draw attention, maybe whoever it was would pass by, would think I was asleep, would leave me alone. It sounds so passive, so English, I suppose, but in that moment, I didn't think I could do anything else. The footsteps stopped. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, and the faint rustling of someone standing just inside the tree line. Minutes passed. I kept my eyes closed. Then the footsteps started again, moving away this time, slowly, carefully, fading back into the trees. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours. When the first light of dawn crept through the branches, I finally sat up, muscles aching, jaw tight from clenching my teeth all night. My gear was untouched, nothing missing. There were no obvious signs that anyone had been there. No footprints I could see, no disturbed ground, no broken branches. But I knew what I'd heard. That morning, I packed up quickly, too quickly, my hands shaking. I didn't make breakfast, didn't stop to enjoy the view. I just wanted out. I hiked hard all day, covering as much ground as I could. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. A squirrel in the brush, a bird taking off, the creak of a tree in the wind. I kept telling myself it was fine, that it had probably been another hiker passing through, that I was overreacting. But part of me knew better. That night, I stopped earlier than usual, too tired to keep going, but I couldn't relax. I set up camp nervously, picking a spot with a clear view in all directions. I ate a cold meal, too tense to bother with the stove, and forced myself to lay down, though I didn't think I'd sleep. I did sleep, eventually, exhaustion won out, but I woke again in the small hours, heart hammering, the hair on my arms standing on end. The footsteps were back. This time, they were closer. I kept my eyes closed, barely daring to breathe. I could hear the soft crunch of leaves, the careful placement of each foot. Whoever it was, they were circling the camp, around and around, not coming in, not speaking, just walking the edge of the clearing. I lay there for what felt like an eternity. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, to move, to grab my things and bolt into the dark. But I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the knowledge that I was alone, completely alone, and whoever was out there was watching me, choosing not to come closer. Yet, eventually, the footsteps stopped. I don't know when. I must have passed out, either from fear or sheer exhaustion, because when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. The camp was untouched again. Nothing missing, nothing broken. But the feeling of being hunted clung to me like a second skin. I packed up, shaking, forcing down some food, drinking as much water as I could. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, just nerves, just the isolation playing tricks on me. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I hiked out as fast as I could, retracing my steps, refusing to stop, even when my legs burned and my feet blistered. I kept glancing back, heart pounding, sure I would see someone on the trail, following at a distance. But I never did. When I finally reached the trailhead, hours later, I nearly collapsed next to my car. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, had to sit for a minute just to stop my hands from shaking. Driving back to the nearest town, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure standing by the road, watching me go. Back in town, I got a room, locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the bed staring at the wall. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Even now, months later, I have trouble falling asleep if there's any kind of noise outside. A creak, a footstep, a whisper of movement. I never found out who it was. Maybe it was just another hiker, curious, cautious, who decided not to approach. Maybe it was someone camping nearby who got turned around at night. Maybe. But the truth is, I don't think so. I think whoever it was had been following me for longer than I realized. Watching from a distance during the day, waiting until nightfall to get closer, circling the camp just to remind me they were there. And the scariest part is knowing that if they'd wanted to do anything, take my things, hurt me, make me disappear, there was nothing I could have done. I was alone, miles from help, no phone signal, no one who even knew exactly where I was. That's the part that sticks with me. I went out there looking for wilderness, for adventure, for solitude. What I found was something much older, much simpler. The quiet, terrifying knowledge that sometimes the scariest thing you can find in the woods isn't a bear, or a mountain lion, or a storm. It's another person. I had always been a city man. London, specifically. I grew up with the noise of buses, the crowded pavements, the smell of petrol and damp concrete. The closest I'd been to wildlife were pigeons on the statues in Trafalgar Square or the occasional fox slinking through the alleyways at night. But I had always dreamed of more. I wanted to experience real wilderness, the kind I'd only ever seen in nature documentaries or glossy magazines. So when I finally had the money and the time, I planned a long solo trip through the American West. I wanted the mountains, the forests, the open sky. I wanted to sleep outside, under the stars, far away from everything I'd known. And because I wanted the full experience, I chose what they call cowboy camping. No tent, no cover, just a sleeping bag under the open sky. I had done plenty of reading, bought all the right gear, and carefully mapped out my route. I chose Lake Tahoe for one leg of my trip, thinking it would offer the perfect mix of beauty and challenge. I knew there were black bears in the area, but I wasn't too worried. I wasn't going into the deep backcountry, and I followed all the bear safety advice. Food packed away, no crumbs, no scented items near my sleeping area. I thought I was smart, prepared, ready. The first few days went beautifully. I hiked all day, stopping now and then to take in the sweeping views, the cold blue water, the rugged rocks and towering pines. At night, I found a quiet, flat spot, rolled out my bag, and settled in. There's a kind of stillness out there that's hard to describe, the sort that makes you feel very small but also very alive. On the fourth night, I set up on a slight ridge, overlooking a valley. The sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I sat quietly, eating a simple dinner of trail mix and jerky, sipping water, watching the last light fade. It was cold that night, colder than before. I zipped my bag up tight, pulled my hat down low, and let myself drift off to sleep. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. There was no sound, no movement, just the dark pressing in on all sides. But I felt it, that prickle on the back of the neck, that creeping sense that something isn't right. My eyes adjusted slowly. I could see the faint outlines of trees above me, the dark sky, a few stars peeking through the clouds. And then I felt the ground shake. Not much, just the faintest thud, like a heavy footfall landing nearby. My heart gave a hard thump. I strained to listen, holding my breath, ears wide open. Another thud, closer this time. The air shifted, bringing with it a strange smell, musky, earthy, strong. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look out of the corner of my eye, and that's when I saw it, a massive shadow towering over me. At first, my brain refused to process it. I thought maybe it was a tree or a trick of the moonlight, but then it moved, a large, slow shifting of weight, the shape swaying slightly. I realized, in a cold, sliding wave of dread, that it was a bear, not 10 feet away. It stood there, head lowered, sniffing at the air. I could just make out the curve of its back, the thick shape of its legs, the rough outline of its fur. I froze, my entire body locked up. I wanted to scream, to leap up, to run, but everything I'd read told me the same thing. Do not run, do not move, do not draw attention. So I stayed perfectly still, eyes half closed, barely daring to breathe. The bear shuffled closer. I could hear its breath now, a heavy, snuffling sound, wet and rough. Its paws pressed into the earth with quiet weight, each step deliberate. It leaned its massive head down, so close I could smell it. My mind raced in a panic jumble. What if it pawed at me? What if it bit? What if it sat down on me by accident? I imagined myself saying, in the most absurdly polite voice, "I do say, my ursine friend, if you would kindly not devour my personhood, I would be in your debt. Cheerio." It was such a ridiculous thought that it almost made me laugh, but the terror locked everything inside me, and all I could do was clench my fists inside the sleeping bag and pray. The bear lingered. Seconds stretched into minutes. I felt a cold sweat running down my spine, soaking into the fabric of my clothes. My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bear shifted again, turned slowly, lumbering back the way it had come. I heard the heavy thuds of its retreating steps, the swish of its body brushing against low branches. The smell faded. The ground stopped trembling. I stayed frozen long after it was gone. The sky lightened slightly, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. Birds began to chirp, tentative and cautious at first, then louder, more insistent. Only then did I sit up, shaking from head to toe. I looked around carefully. There was no sign of the bear, no broken branches, no claw marks, nothing. Just a few deep tracks pressed into the soft dirt nearby. I packed up my things slowly, mechanically, barely tasting the bit of breakfast I forced down. My hands trembled as I rolled up the sleeping bag. My legs felt weak as I strapped on my pack. I hiked out that morning with a kind of numb focus, putting one foot in front of the other, barely noticing the beauty around me. I just wanted to get back, to reach the car, to be away from that place. Hours later, when I finally reached the trailhead and saw the small car park, I almost cried with relief. I sat down heavily on the ground next to my car, head in my hands, and let out a long, shaky breath. Looking back, I know how lucky I was. Black bears aren't usually aggressive, especially if they're not threatened or cornered. But I also know how easily it could have gone wrong. A sudden noise, a flinch, a wrong move, and that bear could have decided I was a threat, or a snack, or just something to play with. I learned something important on that trip, something I hadn't fully understood before. Nature is not a backdrop. It's not a pretty stage for your personal adventure. It's alive, unpredictable, and vast, and you are very, very small within it. I also learned that sometimes the only thing you can do in the face of real danger is nothing at all. You freeze, you wait, you hope, and if you're very lucky, you get to walk away. I finished the rest of my trip, though I stuck to official campsites after that, places with people nearby, with solid tents and bear boxes and all the safety measures you can think of. And when I finally flew home to England, I kissed the ground outside Heathrow, much to the amusement of the people around me. Now, when people ask me about that trip, I tell them about the hikes, the mountains, the lakes. But sometimes, late at night, I remember lying there under the stars, completely exposed, with a wild animal standing over me, and I feel that cold, creeping dread all over again. And I think, never again. Never again will I sleep outside without cover. Never again will I assume that preparation means control. Never again will I forget that in the wild, you're not the top of the food chain. Sometimes, all you can do is close your eyes and pray the bear wanders off. And if you're very lucky, it does. I'm not the type who usually goes for extreme experiences. I grew up in a small English town, the kind where most outdoor time is spent at a football pitch or in a garden. I'm not particularly tough, and I've never thought of myself as brave. But a few years ago, I wanted something different. I wanted to get out of the familiar, do something that would push me, something I could look back on and say, yeah, I did that. So I decided to go camping in the United States, alone. It wasn't a completely mad idea, at least on paper. I read everything I could get my hands on. I joined online groups, watched videos, made lists, and asked questions. I booked flights, arranged for gear, and settled on the Pacific Northwest as my destination. I had read about its beautiful forests, its mountains, and its rugged coastline. I was drawn to the sheer scale of it, the feeling of being small in a big, wild world. By the time I landed in Seattle and picked up a rented car, I was buzzing with excitement but also a bit anxious. I had never camped alone before, let alone in a place with bears, mountain lions, and endless stretches of forest. But I told myself that I was prepared, that if I followed all the advice, I would be fine. The first few days were incredible. I hiked through old-growth forests, camped beside lakes, and cooked simple meals on a small gas stove. I was careful about food storage, following every bear safety tip I'd ever read. Each night, I settled into my sleeping bag, tired but happy, and fell asleep to the sounds of the forest. It was on the 5th night that things changed. I had driven up a rough forest road, far from any official campsite. I wanted that real wilderness experience, and I had found the perfect spot. A small clearing, just big enough for my sleeping bag, surrounded by tall trees. I set up in the early evening, cooked some noodles, cleaned up carefully, and then settled in for the night. The air was cool, and the sky was clear. The stars came out, bright and sharp, and I lay back, feeling lucky and proud. I was doing it, out here alone under the open sky, no tent, just me and the wild. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was a sound, or maybe it was just the way your body sometimes senses something before your mind catches up. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking at the darkness. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the distant creak of trees. Then I heard something else, a heavy, slow footstep. My heart began to pound. I held my breath, listening hard. Another step, soft but solid, the sound of weight pressing into the earth. I turned my head, just slightly trying to see, and then I saw it, a massive shape moving between the trees, low to the ground, thick-bodied, dark-furred, a bear. My brain stuttered. I had never seen a bear outside a zoo. I had read about them, watched videos, but nothing had prepared me for the sheer presence of one in real life, especially when I was lying on the ground, wrapped in a thin sleeping bag, completely exposed. The bear came closer, sniffing at the ground. I could hear its breath, a low, rough snuffling. I could smell it too, musky, wild, rank. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked up. I knew, in theory, that I shouldn't move, shouldn't run, shouldn't make noise. But theory is one thing. Reality is lying there, wide-eyed, while a giant predator sniffs around your feet. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to slow my breathing. I imagined myself saying, in that absurdly polite English voice, "Lovely weather, Mr. Bear, isn't it? I'd be grateful if you didn't eat me." The thought almost made me laugh, except I was too terrified to even twitch. The bear moved closer. I felt its breath on my face. My heart hammered so hard I was sure the bear could hear it. It snuffled around my bag, nudging the side, pressing its nose against the fabric. I stayed perfectly still, fighting the urge to flinch. I thought about my family, about home, about how stupid I had been to come out here alone. The bear pulled back slightly. I dared to open one eye just a crack. It stood over me, massive and solid, the moonlight catching the curve of its back. Its head swung slightly, sniffing the air. Then it turned, slowly, heavily, and began to move away. I didn't move. I waited, counting seconds in my head. 1 minute, 2, 5. Finally, when I was sure the bear was gone, I sat up carefully, every muscle aching from tension. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold them steady. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat with my arms wrapped around my knees, staring into the darkness, listening for every sound, every rustle. As dawn broke, the clearing lit up with pale, cold light. The trees looked ordinary again, the forest calm and still. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, a wild bear had stood over me, close enough to touch. I packed up slowly, my movements stiff and clumsy. My mind felt foggy, like I hadn't slept at all. As I walked back to the car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the bear following me. When I finally reached the car and locked the doors behind me, I let out a shaky breath and laughed, a strange, hollow sound. I had made it. I was alive. Driving back down the forest road, I kept replaying the night over and over in my head. I thought about how close I had been to disaster, how little control I'd really had. No amount of preparation could change the fact that out there, in the wild, I was just another animal, small, soft, and vulnerable. Back in town, I found a small cafe and ordered coffee, more for the comfort of holding something warm than for the taste. I sat there for a long time, watching people go about their day, laughing, chatting, looking at their phones, and I felt like I was in a different world. I finished the rest of my trip cautiously. I stuck to official campsites, avoided solo cowboy camping, and paid close attention to every sign of wildlife. I still loved the outdoors, but I understood it better now. Not as a playground, but as a living, breathing force that didn't care whether I was there or not. When I finally flew home to England, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had wanted an adventure and I'd gotten one, but it had come with a sharp lesson. In the wild, you are never in control. Even now, years later, I sometimes think back to that night, to the sound of heavy footsteps, the smell of wild fur, the cold breath on my face. I remember how I lay there, too afraid to move, silently pleading with the bear to spare me. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I imagine myself whispering, "Lovely weather, Mr. Bear, isn't it?" A tiny human joke in the face of something ancient and indifferent. Because in the end, that's all you really are out there. Small, breakable, and very, very lucky if you get to walk away. I've always been one of those people who second guesses things, overthinks, worries, plays the what-if game in my head. But for some reason, when it came to planning a big solo camping trip in the American wilderness, none of that hesitation showed up. Maybe it was because I was watching too many videos about adventure and self-reliance, or maybe because I was craving something that would shake me awake from my usual boring routines. I'm English, born and raised in a quiet town, where the only wildlife I ever really saw were foxes darting through back gardens at night or the occasional badger on the side of the road. I was raised on stories of how wild and beautiful the US was. Its mountains, forests, deserts, and I wanted to see it for myself, really see it, not from the window of a car or a hotel balcony, but from the ground, sleeping under the stars. So I planned. I saved money, bought gear, read up on safety tips, and mapped out trails. I thought I was ready. I really thought that. But I didn't understand yet that no amount of reading or watching can truly prepare you for the feeling of being out there, alone, surrounded by nothing but wilderness. The feeling that you are small, fragile, and completely at the mercy of nature. I chose a spot in the northern Rockies, deep forest, away from crowded trails, a place where you could go miles without seeing another soul. That's what I wanted. Solitude, challenge, adventure. I wasn't reckless, though. I checked maps, weather, local warnings. I packed my bear canister, my food, my stove, my first aid kit. I knew the rules. Keep food away from camp. Make noise when you hike. Never run from a bear. Play dead if it's a grizzly. Fight back if it's a black bear. I repeated these things in my head like a prayer. The first 2 days went smoothly. I hiked long stretches through thick woods, sometimes crossing little creeks, sometimes climbing rocky slopes that opened up into breathtaking views. The trees seemed endless, and when the sun dipped low, I found a small clearing, set up my sleeping bag, cooked a quick meal, and settled in. I didn't bother with a tent. I wanted the full experience, the cowboy camping style. That night, as I lay in my sleeping bag, looking up at the stars, I felt a kind of peace I'd never known before. The air was sharp and cool, the world around me quiet except for the faint rustling of wind through the branches. I thought to myself, this is it. This is what you came for. But the third night was when everything changed. I had hiked deeper into the forest that day, following a rough game trail that twisted through old trees and heavy undergrowth. I hadn't seen a single person all day, and by the time I made camp, I was tired and sore. I ate quickly, just some packaged noodles and jerky, and stored the remaining food in the bear canister, which I carried far from where I planned to sleep. By nightfall, the air grew colder, and the woods grew still. I climbed into my sleeping bag, pulled the zipper tight, and lay on my back, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and I heard the faint snap of a twig far off. Probably a deer or raccoon, I told myself. I closed my eyes, feeling safe, feeling small, feeling like I belonged to the wilderness in some small way. Sometime in the deep night, I woke up. It wasn't the gentle kind of waking, where you drift up from sleep slowly. It was the sharp, sudden jolt, like your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. My eyes flew open, and I stared up at the dark shapes of the trees overhead. I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the soft hiss of wind through the leaves. But then, underneath that, something else. A slow, heavy crunching sound. Footsteps. My heart thudded in my chest. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe an elk. Big animals, sure, but harmless. I stayed still, breathing shallow, straining to hear. The footsteps grew closer, and they were heavy, too heavy. Not the light, sharp steps of a deer, but something with weight, something pressing down into the earth with each slow step. I turned my head slightly, trying to see, but it was too dark. The footsteps stopped. I could hear breathing, a rough, low sound, not far from where I lay. I squeezed my eyes shut. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to run, but my mind kept flashing back to everything I'd read. Don't run. Don't make sudden moves. Stay still. Play dead if it's a grizzly. I lay frozen, hardly daring to breathe. Then I felt it, a presence looming over me, something large and warm, close enough that I could hear the faint snuffling of its nose, the soft huff of its breath. I imagined myself, lying there like an idiot, thinking, pretend to sleep, play dead. Good practice for when you're really dead a few minutes later. I almost laughed, except my throat was so tight I could barely swallow. The animal, the bear, it had to be a bear, sniffed around me, nudging at the edge of the sleeping bag. I felt its nose press lightly against my arm, felt the shift of its weight as it moved. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might explode. I kept my eyes closed, my body still. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds, but they felt endless. And then, slowly, the bear pulled back. I heard it turn, heard the heavy, deliberate steps as it moved away. I waited, counting in my head, 10, 20, 30, before I dared to open my eyes. The clearing was empty. The bear was gone. I stayed where I was until the sky began to lighten, until the stars faded and the first pale light of dawn touched the tops of the trees. Only then did I sit up, my whole body trembling. I packed up my things slowly, carefully, my hands shaking so hard I could barely tie knots or buckle straps. Every noise, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I finally shouldered my pack and started down the trail, I felt lightheaded, drained. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see the bear following, half expecting it had never left. I hiked until I reached the trailhead, where my car waited. When I saw it, I nearly cried with relief. I climbed inside, locked the doors, and just sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the aftershocks of fear. Driving back to the nearest town, I thought about what had happened, about how close I'd come, about how powerless I'd been. I realized that part of me had been embarrassed, in some weird, stupid way, for troubling the bear, for being the soft, clueless human lying there in its world, hoping not to be noticed. But there was no shame in it, I knew. just survival. I stayed in town that night, in a small motel, wrapped in blankets, listening to the soft hum of traffic outside. It felt strange to be back among people, back among the familiar shapes of walls and doors and locks. Even now, long after that night, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I can hear heavy footsteps outside my window or the rough, low breath of something large and wild. But I remind myself, I got lucky. I walked away, and the next time, if there is a next time, I'll remember just how thin the line is between adventure and survival, just how close I came to crossing it.